Welcome. My name is Kareem Shishakli from IC Systems, and today I'm going to discuss how human behavior affects both the spread of COVID-19 and the use of vaccines, people getting vaccinated. The U.S. has so far, this is all going to be in the context of the United States of America, the U.S. has had 3 waves up until this last summer and then 1 more. So we have 4 waves total. We had a first lockdown, shutdown of the country after the pandemic started. The pandemic was announced in March, was who said it was a pandemic. And in mid-March, roughly or so, most of the states shut down. They started opening again around April 30th, and that went through until, let's say, the beginning of June, beginning and middle June, depending upon where you were. And we had a second wave. People were really excited. It's summer, we're out, it's over, let's go out, let's travel. They started mingling again, even though there were still some restrictions, and we had some cases. Up here, those fell down. A lot of the restrictions started to be removed. And we also had people moving indoors so that they were a lot closer to each other. So there were higher rates of spread because the aerosol stays in the air indoors much more, and people are also close together. We also had the holidays, starting with Halloween in October through Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and people were obviously meeting a lot more then. We then had vaccines starting around here. We see that there was some significant impact here. People were also still being very careful because these numbers were kind of scary. And then with enough vaccines and people thinking we're at the end of the tunnel, everybody just kind of said, okay, it's all over. Let's go out and do anything we want. They were traveling everywhere. They weren't being careful, and we had another wave. I should tell you that in my discussion, I'm going to stop using data passed around here. So I won't be looking at this 4th wave at all in this talk. The question to ask is, can an SEIR model, which is susceptible, exposed, infected, recovered model, can it capture this behavior? We have stages for each of those. So in that standard model, we have a group of susceptible people in the community, and they can become exposed. They can become exposed based on the people they contact and the infection rate for the disease, and they move into this exposed box. After some amount of time, they start to show symptoms, and we call them infected. Of course, they're infected in both of these. This is asymptomatic, this is symptomatic. However, with COVID, it progressed to a certain point where there is a distinction. They could be here and still be asymptomatic. Anyway, after some amount of time, they become what's called infected. Both the infected and exposed people are actually infected with the disease and can spread it to others based on the contact rate. After some time, again, they recover and they become recovered. Notice this model does not allow for people who are recovered to become susceptible again. In other words, for their temporary immunity to go away. The behavior of this model is, well, let's look at recovered first, which is in green. We have this S-shaped growth in the number of recovered people. Of course, everyone recovers, everyone gets sick. Susceptible goes to 0 in this model. And we have these skewed bell shapes for exposed and infected. This is not oscillatory, really. I mean, if you look at this, we've got this oscillations. And so something's missing from this model. First of all, some responses that we might have are the shutdown. So that reduces the contact rate. That's a policy issue. I distinguish between whether this is a policy response or a behavioral response. Shutdown is a policy response. We quarantine infected individuals, and they maybe because they showed symptoms, so we could see that, or we tested. That reduces the contact rate. We use masks and social distancing. This reduces the infection rate. I mentioned that as a behavior, though it can also be policy. We need to deal with the fact that summer, people are going to go out more and travel more. And also we have euphoria at the end of the shutdown. So this is going to increase the contact rate. Holiday season, everyone's going to be spending time with each other and traveling, higher contact rate. Vaccines will reduce the infection rate. vaccine euphoria. Everyone's getting vaccinated. It's all over. We're safe. Will increase the contact rate for sure, but it will also increase the infection rate because people will stop doing this, for example. It doesn't directly reduce the infection rate, but it will cause people to stop wearing their masks and not social distancing. And if we remove mask mandates, that will increase the infection rate. If we start thinking about those and we try to think about where the oscillation would come from, we have to think about in systems. We learned, hopefully, that to get oscillation, we need a second order or higher balancing feedback loop that has a delay. Second order just means there are two stocks in the loop. And let's just take a look at the behavioral responses to see if we get that. As the number of new cases go up, after a delay, the perception of risk goes up. I don't use pluses to keep the diagram simple. So these, if I don't show anything, it's a plus. If I show something, it would be a minus, like here. As perception of risk goes up, the contact rate goes down. As contact rate goes down, the number of new cases goes up. We have a balancing feedback loop with delay. And it's got a couple of stocks in it, by the way, even though I only show one here. As the perception of risk, as the number of cases go up and perception of risk goes up, prophylactic measures, i.e. hand washing and social distancing and wearing masks, also goes up, and that reduces the infection rate. Reducing the infection rate reduces the number of new cases, and we have another balancing feedback loop. As the number of new cases go up, this is not behavioral, but this is an important loop. The number of new strains increases, which increases the infection rate and the number of new cases. That's a reinforcing loop that is important because we want to try to limit the number of new cases, so we limit the number of new strains. As the perception of risk, as the number of new cases go up and the perception of risk goes up, the number of people who get vaccinated goes up. So we have more vaccinations, and the infection rate goes down, new cases goes down, and we have another balancing feedback loop. As the perception of risk goes up, the number of vaccinations goes up, and the perception of risk goes down. That's actually a balancing loop, but this R is referring to a much bigger loop that is more important that I want to call your attention to. As vaccinations go up, perception of risk goes down, contact rate goes up, new cases go up. So more vaccinations can lead to more new cases. Of course, then new cases increase the perception of risk, which increases the number of vaccinations. So this works on both sides. It both increases new cases, but can also increase vaccinations. There's other feedback in the system, drifting goals, for example. New cases in the United States fell to just over 10,000 per day in July of this year, in 2021, and that was a low number. People had been thinking, 50,000 a day is about normal, or 60 even. So it fell pretty far, but then it rose to over 150,000 in September. After that, people's idea of what was dangerous changed from 50 or 60 up to 100. Once it dropped below 100,000, all of a sudden everybody started feeling it was safe again. I know around here, people were wearing masks while it was over 100,000. And when it fell down, a lot of people stopped wearing masks. Drifting goals impacts our perception of risk. As the number of new cases goes up after a delay, our perception of what's normal for new cases goes up. The number of new cases that's normal. As that goes up, our perception of risk goes down. As our perception of risk goes down, our risky behavior goes up, our vaccine avoidance goes up. Risky behavior means not washing our hands, not wearing masks, not social distancing. As that risky behavior goes up, the number of new cases goes up. There's also feedback around vaccine hesitancy. A lot of people don't trust how fast this was tested. They don't believe it was really correctly tested. And in addition, they're not confident in the new technology, the mRNA technology that was used, even though it hasn't been used in the mainstream, but it's been used in vaccines since 2005. So there was a lot of vaccine hesitancy. There are other causes of vaccine hesitancy, and still are, and that have politics for one, conspiracy theories for another. For example, the mRNA will change your DNA. Racial distrust, the white people giving this to a minority, they are trying to do something to control us. This is based on past experiments that have been done on minorities, and also discounting the seriousness of the disease. For example, Bolsonaro saying in Brazil that it's just a cold. This model only looks at the first cause at the top. It doesn't look at any of these. Anyway, as the number of vaccinations go up, the fraction of people vaccinated goes up. After a delay, the fear of vaccines goes down and the number of vaccinations goes up. So this is against hesitancy because we don't trust the vaccine to be effective, or we don't trust the technology. The more we see it working, the less hesitancy we'll have for this reason, not any of the others. Here's the SEIR model again. If we're going to be quarantining people and we're going to handle deaths, we need to change this model. So first of all, we're going to quarantine those who we know are infected, who we may know that because they have symptoms. We may know that because we tested them. At some point, they will recover. We're also doing general testing through the population. So we will find some people who are exposed and we will quarantine them. They will eventually become infected and recover, hopefully. But if not, the infected people in serious cases will die. And this is what the model would look like in that case. Age groups are not disaggregated in this model. I did that when I looked at vertical isolation in Brazil, which Bolsonaro suggested in April of 2020. But it's almost impossible. Well, it was impossible for me anyway, because there's not enough data to calibrate an age disaggregated model. Vaccinations are handled like this. We have susceptible population. We have some vaccines that are available to administer. We administer them, and people are vaccinated once. Only the number of people, we look at vaccine effectiveness. If it's 90% and 90% of the vaccinated people end up here, the 10% go somewhere else. I'll discuss that in a minute. People who recovered presumably have some immunity already, so we don't worry about vaccine effectiveness as much, and they get vaccinated once. Where they have to wait, the average time between the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, the wait is 25 days, and then they're ready for the second dose. There may not be a second dose available, so they have to wait here. But when there is, they'll get administered and they will get vaccinated. People who didn't get in here because they fell below the threshold of the effectiveness of the vaccine don't get the second dose. So we have in reality they do. So we have a little slight counting problem there, but it's a small difference. You'll notice these are arrayed, susceptible and recovered, the entire chain of that we saw on the last slide. The entire SEIR chain is arrayed by the vaccine status. Either they haven't been vaccinated yet or they're vaccinated. And that's because we don't want to vaccinate the vaccinated people twice. We don't want to bring them here again. So they actually go back in. And we also want to track breakthrough infections, which are infections among those who are already vaccinated. And those will happen because the vaccine is not 100% effective. It's not 100% effective. Okay. Here's the whole model connected the way it should be connected. This arrow, by the way, it's not from deaths. This comes from vaccinated, goes behind deaths. And all the links here, these two links also go to here, but are not shown because it would make this a mess. And mutations are not shown here either because that would add complexity we don't need in this picture. The last detail has to do with delays. The SEIR model uses first order material delays, which means the outflow is just the stock value divided by the time that it should be in that stock, the time to recover, the average time. If we look at the response of that delay, we send a pulse into it, we'll see the pulse is in blue, the first order response is in red, the third order response is in green. We can see that the majority that exits the stock, the largest amount exits the stock right away. I shouldn't say the majority, but the largest amount exits right away. This is not what we would expect. We would expect some kind of distribution. The delay here is 5, which is about here. We would expect some kind of distribution. This is skewed distribution. But this is more realistic, the third order. So a third order delay was used, material delay was used for everything throughout the SEIR model that we just saw. And there's a blog article I wrote about that at this link here. The model was calibrated from the beginning of the pandemic until April 22nd, 2021. It was actually calibrated many times, starting at the beginning of March, I think, and several times. I haven't calibrated it since. It's quite a job to calibrate. But you can see it's fairly closely matching the data for both total cases and for deaths. In fact, if you calculate R squared, it's 0.99. And the new cases don't match as well. Of course, the new cases jiggle all over the place. And I had to calibrate in 3 different regimes. So these roughly correspond to the waves. The first regime is, in fact, the first wave. And we had not very good data. There wasn't very good testing. There weren't very good treatments. So this is not very different. Treatments got better here. The data got a little better here. And then here we have the fall situation with vaccines coming online and more indoor contact. So things were different again. So that was a different regime. You'll notice it's a little bumps at the regime boundaries. I could have smoothed those out, but I didn't bother. It doesn't make a huge difference to the results. As you can see, it doesn't change things much. We can conduct several experiments on this model. The first thing is, first of all, what if there were no behavioral loops, right? I mean, the whole question here is, how does behavior affect things? So what if there's no behavior? What if I disable the 3 behavioral loops, B1, B2, and B3? What would happen? Well, we can see in red that without the behavioral loops, the number of cases is much lower. It's about half. Likewise, the number of deaths is about half of what it actually would have been, about half of what it ended up being without those behavioral loops. And this suggests very strongly that epidemiological models need to include behavioral feedback. The next experiment, what if people are less careful than my model has them in the base case, right? What if they don't wear masks and social distance or wash their hands as much as they were in that base case? And I just picked an arbitrary amount to decrease that, as have 10%. It doesn't really matter. That number isn't important. It's just what impact does it have when people are less careful? And we can see that there are a lot more cases, in fact, more than 10% more cases. And we can also see that through this period, the number of cases grew much faster than it did when people were being careful. So it's kind of important that people wear their masks and social distance and wash their hands. On May 14th, the CDC, in an attempt to get more people to get vaccinated, get their vaccines, because the vaccination rate was dropping, they decided that, we'll just tell people if you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask anymore. This has the unfortunate consequence that no one knows who's vaccinated and who's not. And there's a huge controversy around the mask to begin with and a lot of resistance. So everyone stopped wearing masks. The CDC later said, we thought people would be honest. Yeah, right. Okay, anyway, instead of looking at the number of new cases, we're going to look at breakthrough infections, because this impacts the people who were vaccinated more than anyone else because now they're not safe because the people who aren't vaccinated, if they're sick, they're now spreading it to everyone, including those the vaccine was not effective for. So we see the breakthrough infections increase, more than 10% here without masks in a very short period of time, because this from here to here is only 1, 2, 3 months, right? And the number of deaths increases more than 10%, breakthrough deaths among those who were vaccinated, who thought, I'm going to get a vaccine, I'm going to protect myself, and this will help bring this to an end, because we can reach what is called herd immunity, the point at which enough people have been infected and are vaccinated so that the disease cannot spread any further. But they died anyway. Experiment number 4, what if we delayed the vaccine? What if it wasn't ready in December of 2020? If we delay the vaccine, the number of cases starting from that point go up and up and up, and so do the deaths, by the way. I don't need to show it. It's the same trajectory. It goes up and up. And I stopped showing it here. I didn't go any further because it actually rises quite sharply out here. And I'm not sure if that's the right behavior. I didn't want to project too far into the future. The last experiment was, what is the impact of vaccinating children aged 12 to 15, which was approved on May 16, 2021 by the FDA, Food and Drug Administration in the United States. And this is less definitive. The only thing we can look at in this particular model is the number of people who got vaccinated. And of course, that goes up. So we're closer to herd immunity because more people are vaccinated. But there's a story under this that we can't represent in this model because this model is not disaggregated by age. A major vector of spreading disease through a community is school-age children, because they go into an environment where there are a lot of them all together from all over the community. They mix together all day long, and then they go home, and they could have brought something home to their parents, who then bring it to work, to their grandparents. In any case, lots of research over the decades has shown that this is a strong vector. And so you would expect that being able to vaccinate children would reduce the spread of the disease, but I can't show that directly because the model is not age disaggregated. I do show that clearly in my age disaggregated model on vertical isolation that I released in April of 2020. The summary of where things stand on July 5th, 2021 is here. The base case is at the top. You can see if we take out behavior loops, the behavior is 50%. The cases are 50% lower, and the deaths as well. If people are less careful, the cases go up by about 25% and the deaths by 33%. That's for a 10% change in how careful they are. So pretty serious. If the vaccine is delayed, we don't look very far in the future. So we do see increases. If we look a lot further into the future, a lot farther out, we will see those cases go up a lot more. For these two, 3 and 5, this isn't the best measure. We can see small changes here because of that. But here, the real thing to look at again is breakthrough infections and deaths. And here, it would really be good to be able to age disaggregate this to see what happens. Let's quickly go look at the policy simulator for this. That's available online. There'll be a link at the end of the presentation. And if we go to this and we explore it, we can, for example, you can go through all this, but I'm just going to show you the parameters very quickly. You can specify how much of the population you expect to eventually get vaccinated, maybe not all of it. You can specify the effectiveness of the vaccines. 90% was what Pfizer and Moderna in the total population as it was administered. 95 in the trials, but 90% later. And it's less now. In any case, this is the actual simulator. You get to run the model. So this is the data here is in blue now, and the model run is in red. You get to then implement policies, for example, turning off behavior and running the model again. And we can see those results both in deaths and in not. We can turn that back on and turn off masks. And we can look at starting on May 14th, and we can see what happens. You can see it doesn't affect the cases in a large way because it's a small number overall. This is total. So that's the problem. The total is pretty large already. And we can look and see it goes from 622 to 634,000. So that's not small, but it's not, in this graph, you don't see much. However, you can see it here. If you look at the people who actually were vaccinated and caught COVID, you can see there are quite a few more than otherwise. So these are breakthrough infections. That's all I wanted to show you about the simulator. In summary, human behavior is a really important factor when looking at the pandemic. It has a huge impact on how fast the pandemic spreads, as well as the number of infections and the number of deaths. Vaccines are critical to end the pandemic, but they can make people feel far too early, before we've reached vaccine hesitant, the herd immunity. They can feel that they're safe and they're secure, and they'll start be engaging in riskier behaviors, which will cause the pandemic to last longer. They may also decide they don't need to get vaccinated because enough other people are vaccinated. I don't need to do this. So this then makes people who are vaccinated vulnerable again, even though they thought they were secure. So it's really important to have the message that you need to continue to mask, you need to continue to social distance, you need to continue to wash your hands until we've reached herd immunity. Finally, epidemiological models should include behavioral influences. I think that's pretty clear. In closing, I do want to look at some of the limitations of the model and what future research might be. The model doesn't address loss of vaccine immunity. It doesn't look at boosters. I do have a version of the model I started that does that, but I've not finished that yet. We don't have age groups disaggregated. This affects how it spreads and how many people actually end up with it with severe cases, because it shifts toward the elder population, even though with the Delta variant, everyone's actually affected pretty badly. It's still, the elderly are affected more still. And so how it spreads and how severe it is as far as number of deaths and severe cases would change. Because the US is aggregated together as one country and not as separate regions, there's only one nationwide quarantine, even though there were a lot of local quarantines. Because mutations are treated as a simple function that increases with the number of infections, there's no possibility in the model for large, discrete or disjoint jumps in infectivity, for example, or severity, as happened with the Delta variant. So if you keep running the model into the future, it never gets to the point where we have a Delta variant, for example. So you don't have that level of infectivity and severity, and you don't have the loss in vaccine effectiveness either. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll be available after this for you to ask them. The simulator for this is at this address. The article that talks about what's happened here, what this slide presentation is based on, this article is available here at this address. Thank you very much for attending, and I hope to see you at the conference.